Hi, this is Professor Dimitri. Okay, so I'm ready to go when you are. Okay, bye. Hi.
Oh yeah, thanks. I forgot it was today. I thought it was tomorrow. Thanks, sir.
Okay. I'm glad I called you. I sent out the message yesterday, but I didn't do it again this morning because, I don't want to keep bombing, but I probably should because it's, in terms of these etiquette for doing things online, you probably have to remind people more than they need to than less than they need to. So I'll
Kind
do
of a hectic schedule these days, isn't it?
Yeah. So, okay. So let me share the screen and find your paper first here. And so let me do that. And so, well, you know the procedure. And
Yeah.
so we go here. And so you write that history is the accumulation of human affairs enveloping both successes and mishaps. Hey, can I ask you a question? Did you live in the US or Britain or Canada or Australia for a while?
Actually, the first two. Yeah,
Oh,
I
okay.
believe them both are,
Because your
England
English
and
is pretty much native equivalency, so in
I
your
appreciate it.
speaking. So despite being actual occurrences, interpreting history is not objective. Zinn asserts that history is within the eyes of the beholder and that historians distort following their ideology values. Yeah. Zinn sees that there's more to history than what is taught in classrooms. History may be written by victors, is however remembered by the losers. Remembered by the losers. Do you think that that okay, maybe let me go ahead and say this again just in case we make some more changes. I mean, I'm thinking about some things that are coming to mind now that I have spoken with people and done this for a couple of times with others, a few times with other students. Do you think other people necessarily do remember their history? I mean, one of the sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I guess it's more like people that are like politically motivated that they'll remember it more. I mean, like it's not really more a general thing. It's more like the people that are really like passionate about history. They really feel like the humiliation or so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So that I mean, I feel like when I was writing this whole paper is that I make a lot of generalizations. Like
Well, you
I
might want to
write
be
this
careful. I
and
mean,
this.
it's good that you're thinking through your ideas, and I appreciate that. I mean, because they obviously they're provocative, and I mean, they can be remembered by the losers. But part of the tragedy that we see with marginalized communities is that they have been so brainwashed to in effect, view themselves as to be ashamed of themselves, that they are pathetic because they're just genetically disgusting, and that's the most tragic thing you see in people, that they don't remember their history. They don't, and I'm not saying there is such a thing as objective history to remember, because this is a theme that comes up in all the academic conferences I go to about how history is constructed. They talk about the national imaginary, about how people say that building a state is an act of collective forgetting, selective remembering and collective forgetting of certain things, which of course is done often through coercion and punishment, because if you remember the wrong things and express them, you'd be punished. So there's all this talk about how that I mean, it's this focus on perception that we need to focus on the processes that cause people to have certain mythologies and stereotypes in their heads, including people that have been traditionally portrayed from the time they're born from Hollywood, through films, through popular culture, like with those American Indians, as being a joke, a threat or a joke that white people civilized. And I'm not saying that people don't necessarily hear resentment when they're born about how they are abused, but if you are born into like on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, where, like something like 70-80% of the people there have drug and alcohol abuse problems. The poorest place in the whole United States is on that reservation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Like,
so you're born as a child in there, and you see all of this. You come out of your mother's womb and you see all of this. You might well, accept the fact that we really are pathetic. And so Zinn might be wanting to, because sometimes Zinn goes over. I mean, you can make the argument that he might even go overboard a little bit, because he talks
kind of
about
apologetic, right?
how he portrays the life of the Carib Arawak or Taino people on the islands that Columbus landed on, as living some kind of almost a paradise existence. They're so peaceful and everything, and that's probably a stereotype too. But I think what do you think he's trying to do there?
Like, I feel like while I was reading the book, like sometimes he's a little bit too apologetic in a way. Like America's not perfect by any means. I mean, but the whole thing is like America's like built upon this like beautiful concept of modern democracy, right? Like how people are like masters of their own destiny. And of course, during that whole journey, there'll be like some atrocities committed here and there. But I feel that I don't know, like Zinn at times is just like I kind of agree with Flynn in some sorts of that in that matter as well. Like he's a bit apologetic. Like I like that he's objective, but I don't really agree with some parts when he's like completely like belittling like some of the achievements. Let's say
I mean,
like the Declaration of Independence, the same thing.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, I always remember when I
was
was in school, decades ago, my professor said that we don't have a good theory of history. Like, we don't know why we do, as a collective field, we do history. We think we do history because we want to try to understand, learn the objective facts of the past. And first off, I'm not certain that that's why we do history. Well, that might be one of the motivations we think we are, that I'm going to do history. Well, you might want to do history. Anybody might want to do history. But in terms of its function that it serves, in a society, which I think Zinn would probably agree with, that basically what does he say? Your theoretical lens, like the lens of these glasses, the lens you look through at the information that you have from the past, will shape your determination and understanding of the past. So the theoretical framework that you're using and will determine how you portray history. And your theoretical framework, he doesn't really go into the details on this, but your theoretical framework, it derives from what I think you can just infer from a Marxist framework. The theoretical frameworks reflect the interests of the people that are creating them. And so and those interests can be, intellectual, personal, but, collectively, we start talking about economic interests. We start talking about racial identity interests, racial supremacy, white supremacy interests that function in a way that create a predisposition to orient the portrayal of history in textbooks in a way that that Zinn is criticizing, right? That history is about great, white, powerful men that did amazing things. And they created what exists today. And so if you're poor and backward and marginalized, it's not because of the society you're living in, it's your fault that you're poor and marginalized and dumb and uneducated and born to a crack addicted mother and an alcoholic father. And so you have it's your fault. Right. And I think that's what and so he's trying to counteract that from a Marxist perspective, because Marxists have always emphasized for the last 200 years, 150 years, that theory should serve what they call praxis. That theory is supposed to be derived from efforts to change history. The theory is supposed to be not change history, but change reality. And so and that either we have a relationship to reality, either we want to protect it or we want to change it. Protect it, are the conservatives. They're the status quo people. There are people who want to change it. Some want to change it in ugly ways. Some want to change it in not so ugly ways, positive ways. But the theory that they are articulating, it reflects their relationship to the status quo, to protect it or to change it. And he wants to, first off, even though people want to protect it, it still changes. That's a theme that I think also, particularly Marxist and neo-Marxist theorists emphasize, that the world is always changing. Well, everybody admits the world changed. I mean, nobody's going to admit that is going to accept that the world today, it has the same political values as 200 years ago. I mean, but conservatives claim that what would they do? Those people who support the American creed notions, they really emphasize economic forces, that economic capitalism is liberating. And that is what 80% of what made America the powerful, amazingly powerful state supposedly that it is today. And socialism is as bad as Nazism from that perspective. And that's what they say. Since Zinn's been dead 11 years. The first edition of his book came out 41 years ago. And since Zinn has died, you're seeing this going on right now in the United States with this effort to stop, for example, the teaching of so-called critical race theory in American schools. Again, I was just listening this morning to the news reports about how groups of people, particularly white groups, are pushing to pass laws to forbid teachers in schools from teaching children theoretical perspectives on history that make them feel bad about being white, that make them feel ashamed of their country, and that make them feel that there's a historical obligation to that they have to pay for the sins and crimes of other people in the past. And so there's a hostile reaction to this. But again, the assumption is that
cancel culture, stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's funny that Zinn's been dead 11 years, but Trump referenced Zinn in recently in that video I showed at the beginning of the semester, right? He purposely criticized Zinn, and that's a reaction to people like to Zinn, and Flynn represents that. Daniel Flynn's critique goes back. I mean that article that was written published in 2003, but that goes way back to the 1970s. That movement that emerged as a reaction against the new social movements that Zinn represents. Zinn represents the feminist movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the youth movement, all of these new left movements that emerged.
Shocking how that really resonates with current times.
Yeah. Well, and why do you think it's still resonating? Since the 1960s and the early 1970s, or over 50 years ago, and the Vietnam War ended 48 years ago. Why do you think that's still resonating today?
I guess it's like two things. It's people don't like change, and people don't like to be wrong, isn't it?
Well, I think they don't. I tell you what I think it is, because when you read, for example, when you read Flynn's article, he makes explicit reference to how, for example, there's no reference to, for example, he makes explicit reference to Ronald Reagan's speech to Brandenburg Gate in divided Berlin in the early 1980s. So right after Ronald Reagan got elected in 1980, he decided that we're going to again recharge ourselves for the Cold War. We're going to finally deal with this communism. He labeled it in a 1983 speech the Soviet Union as the evil empire that he explicitly, and this is a quote that he said, is responsible for most of the bad things in the world today. So he said that in 1983, and Zinn makes reference to that Brandenburg speech where Reagan goes to the Berlin Wall and says, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And for Flynn, in other words, he puts Reagan's speech, which must have been in 1985, because Gorbachev came to power in 85 in the Soviet Union, or 85, 86. He puts that speech together with the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln in 1863, and George Washington's farewell address in 1799. I think it was 1799 when he ended those, like some of those important speeches in the history of the United States. He puts Reagan's speech in there, and Reagan, of course, for many people, gets the credit for supposedly winning the Cold War. You took the U.S. foreign policy class, right? So, yeah. I mean, we talked about how this notion of what was the Cold War about? That the Cold War was based on this assumption that prevails not around Zinn, but the prevailing dominant view, the one that wins, that one that controls the government, is the view that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany trying to take over the world, and the Americans successfully contained it, caused it to disappear, and therefore saved the world. It began when they invaded France and Operation Overlord in 1944 to stop the Soviet Union from going to Paris, because they would have gone to Berlin and then gone all the way to the rest of Europe. And then America stayed, and then it fought the Cold War, and there were mistakes made, but it's not America's fault that lots of people died in Korea and Vietnam, because the Soviet Union was trying to take over the world. So you had many hundreds of thousands of Koreans died, but they were sacrificed because we were trying to save humanity from hell and Vietnamese and all these other people that died. Mm-hmm. And the mistakes were made, so we screwed up in Vietnam. But that wasn't because. But the reaction to the loss of the Vietnam War, there was some disruption. I mean, there was some disruption. People saying, we were assuming that the Soviet Union was causing that instability and threats to our allies in Vietnam. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe it was a self-determination movement that used Marxist language, communist language, the way the Chinese did, and the way the North Koreans did, and the way that other groups did. Yeah?
Oh, sorry. Sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I was just curious about what do you think about that? What do you think about this? Do you think people started to become a bit more sympathetic towards the Soviet Union and communists, Vietnam, because they want to like dodge the draft or something like that?
Well, that was the assumption that people like, for Daniel Flynn, Howard Zinn, and these others overreacted to these mistakes and decided that America was the source of evil. And they're called New Left historians. Zinn was one of them, but there are other ones, like a man named William Appleman Williams. He's been dead for a while. He's going to reference at the end of the book Gar Alpovitz, who I think is still alive. He's in his 90s too, like Noam Chomsky, that claims, for example, why did the United States drop the atomic bomb on Japan twice? Did it drop the atomic bomb to end the war and end the bloodshed? Was that its real concern, to minimize human suffering because or was it primarily because they wanted to show the Soviet Union, which was a communist state, Stalinist state, not what people had hoped for on the left, but it wasn't necessary to drop the atomic bomb to win that war, but Truman wanted to use the war to terrorize Stalin. And this is an argument made by these New Left people that include Zinn, Gar Alpovitz, William Appleman Williams, Noam Chomsky, who's still alive also in his 90s. And these people first became well known in the late 1960s, resisting the Vietnam War. And so from the perspective of Flynn, they didn't. And the others that are represented by Flynn, they include the so-called neoconservatives. We call them the neoconservatives today. And those are people that a lot of people are dead, like Jeane Kirkpatrick was Ronald Reagan's first United Nations ambassador. Scoop Jackson they were both Democrats. Senator Jackson from Wisconsin was not just a Republican thing. But these people who really despise Jimmy Carter, because Jimmy Carter said, well, maybe containment and communism, our focus was wrong. I'm going to emphasize human rights for American foreign policy. And he comes into office in 1976, after the South Vietnam collapses and Cambodia collapses in Laos in 1975. And he talks about human rights, and we see that there was a socialist revolution in Nicaragua under the Sandinistas, which, we're talking in communist terms. There was a socialist revolution in Grenada, little island off the coast of Venezuela in the Caribbean. There was insurgency began, leftist insurgency began in El Salvador. Then in Angola, the communists, everybody's in communist terms, they come to power, the MPLA, the Marxist People's Liberation Army, or something of Angola. They come to power in Angola in post-Portuguese colony. They come to power in Mozambique, leftist, communist, Marxist talking people. They come to power in Ethiopia and Somalia. And people blame Carter for this, that the Soviet Union could see that Jimmy Carter was a fool, talking in fluffy, nice terms about human rights, and use the opportunity to expand their influence and domination. And then, of course, America's close ally, the client that they put in power through the CIA coup in 1953 in Iran, the Shah of Iran, is overthrown in 1978-79. American embassy personnel taken hostage in the middle of the revolution in 79, and they're held, and Carter can't get them out. And then the economy becomes weak. Meanwhile, the economy becomes bad because there's the Arab-Israeli wars that cause price of oil to go way up in 1973. And then the Iranian Revolution causes the price of oil to go up again. So you have high inflation in the US. You have humiliations hitting the US. You have the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan in around Christmas time, 1979. And Jimmy Carter is portrayed by people like Gene Kirkpatrick and other people who some are dead now. A lot of them, like I can't remember their Irving Kristol, the father of Bill Kristol, who's another neocon. Yeah, all of these people are at Dick Cheney would be in that. Donald Rumsfeld in this category. Paul Nitze, who was at the founding of the Cold War, they're all criticizing Carter, and Carter's a fool, and the people and anybody who is weakening America's will and determination to fight the Cold War, because they're still arguing that, okay, we made a mistake in Vietnam, but the Soviet, and like Ronald Reagan said in 1983, he made a speech. In 1983, the Evil Empire speech, you can find on YouTube. He says the Soviet Union is, and I remember watching him when he said it. The Soviet Union is responsible for most of the evil in the world. He said that, and it was this people like Zinn and their followers who are weakening. We're trying to weaken the will of the United States. That America won the Cold War in spite of traitors, intellectual traitors like Howard Zinn, or at least dupes, fools. America won the Cold War and saved you and me and the whole world in spite of Zinn and the followers of Zinn. And now they're undermining, continuing to, and when you read the Flynn article, it's not that I think it's interesting. He's not, you can always find one person somewhere who says stupid things. It's not that Howard Zinn himself wrote this book. What Flynn wants to know is, why are so many teachers and college instructors making you students read Zinn? What's the problem with academics? What's the problem with universities? And you hear the same words today in 2021, that universities and intellectuals are sources of decadence, sources of weakness, sources attacking the fundamental values that made America great. Capitalism, the American creed, that saved the world from evil. What's the problem with these academics and these types, and they don't even teach, and so they don't even teach good history. He says their facts are even wrong. I mean, he emphasizes, for example, how George Washington probably wasn't the richest man, even though Howard Zinn said he was in America at the time. Although we don't really know. So it's interesting how they kind of backed off on that in that exercise we did in class. Is we don't really know how many slaves George Washington had. If he had, it's interesting that we don't know that, considering how important he was. But and so that is the anger that's driving a lot of this. That now we have new problems, and America is, clearly there's reasons why America is so influential in the world today. It's not just because we make excellent guns. There's something attractive about America that attracts so much of the world, that explains why, and of course, that's not covered in the Zinn book. Zinn doesn't cover about what makes America great. He doesn't talk about America's achievements. He doesn't talk about putting the first man on the moon. He doesn't talk about all of that stuff. It's all evil. America's all about exploitation and division and failures and lies. So then why is America so influential if it's so evil? And particularly when we've got other problems, whether they be political Islam. I mean, Flynn's writing his article 2 years after the 9/11 attacks, right? Where George Bush talks about the axis of evil. So we got to fight a new war. Like we fought the Axis powers in World War II. We fought the evil empire in 1983, according to Ronald Reagan, and George Bush puts them together. The Axis powers, the evil empire, the axis of evil. So we're going to fight the axis of evil. Kim Jong-il at the time in North Korea, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, the Mullah Islamic regime in Iran, and everybody else who supports terrorism as defined by the United States. And now we've got another problem. Now everybody's focused on China, which is still ruled by a communist party. And America is supposed to feel bad about its failures, at least considering how many people that Mao Zedong is responsible for overseeing the death of so many people in China under that communist party. What are we doing undermining America's pride when we still have these other problems that America has to take the world leadership role to confront them? So I think that's what angers people like Flynn. And it goes back to what was the nature of the Cold War. America saved the world, and it saved the world because people like America. Why do they like America? Zinn doesn't tell you why they like America. He only tells you why you shouldn't, why you've been brainwashed to like America.
I got a feeling that I think why people do like America, though. This all comes back to the Declaration of Independence, doesn't it? And the whole idea of like freedom, liberty, and well, human rights to a certain degree. But now everything's kind of getting better. It's sort of, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think Zinn does say that. He does say, the American Revolution did trigger thought to, well, if we're going to, people have the right to vote in elections, what about women and Black people? And people really, that does inspire more of that. And I think, if you wanted to be more intellectually less, more supportive of Zinn, Zinn wants to understand or wants to teach students also in that book that the world changes because people demand change. There's economic forces at work, like technology develops so that we have factories, and now you don't need, 250 years ago, if you're a woman, you needed to marry a man and make babies if you wanted to survive. There was no Social Security. You got old and nobody's going to take care of you except your kids. So you better make some kids, and you better have a farm because everybody's a farmer, most everybody. And that's hard work. And you need to partner up with a man. All right. But the world changes, and now we have technology. And so now, we're not physically constrained as much by economic limitations and technological limitations. But it's not just that. It's not just capitalism and technology that explains why people become free. It's because people organize and make demands on the basis of those changes, like the emergence of modern mass industrialization, that exercise we did in class, right? Where you have modern mass unskilled labor emerging in factories at the beginning of the 20th century. And so that's where people are getting their jobs, right? Because that's where the economy is producing, mass production. And so people, but to get, for example, what we take for granted, that there should be limitations how many hours a week you can work. The kids should not have to work. They should be able to go to school. And so workers should be paid enough so that the children don't have to work, so that there's protections in the factories for people not to get killed by accidents, by sloppy procedures. All of those things you just take for granted, they had to be fought for by people. They weren't just given by rich, powerful white men who felt bad. And that is what I think Zinn is trying to get across, because now we just take it for granted. Well, of course, children should go to school. Well, why is that taken for granted? That wasn't always taken. There were the people saying that for a long time, but now we just take it for granted. Every child should go to school and should be able to go to school and should be able to study. But that was something that was established. It would not have happened without the labor movement. Women having the right to vote. That had to happen with the suffrage movement, the women's movement of the early 19th and 20th centuries. So I think that's what the theme he's trying to get apart. And you don't learn about those disses, because when those people started their struggles, they were hated, they were attacked, they were ridiculed by the powerful, rich, powerful people that controlled the media and the press. And they caused trouble. They disrupted things. They upset the established status quo, and they made a lot of people angry. So I've gone on and on and on here. Do you have any questions?
Oh no, I got like pretty good
Okay.
idea. I'm gonna change this whole paper because I was not really happy with this whole first draft, but
Well,
now
it's just okay. That's the purpose of having these talks, is because, to think through things. And so let me go to your Zoom, the thing I sent you, and go like that and just attach, because I did highlight in yellow that one comment, but and let me see what we had. So it was a pleasure talking with you, and I'll see you next week. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Next week, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.